Welcome, everyone. What an exciting evening we're venturing into here, and it's great to see all of the faces. Good evening and welcome to the 2021 Boston Mayoral Candidates Forum on Youth and Young Adult Issues. Again, my name is Abigail Forrester. I am the Executive Director for the Center for Teen Empowerment. I am humbled and honored to open up what should be a great evening and an opportunity to hear from several candidates running to be mayor of our city. Being able to host this forum in collaboration with the Private Industry Council and the Boston Opportunity Agenda is somewhat nostalgic for me because about 10 years ago, when I worked for an organization as the Associate Director of Public Policy, I was asked to lead the selection and coordination of about 14 youth selected from national nonprofit organizations to form the National Council of Young Leaders, which was a mandate from the White House under the Obama administration. And we kicked off the Opportunity Youth United agenda in Washington, D.C. That council still exists today as the leading force behind the OYU movement. Today is a testament to how what is seemingly a small agenda, inclusive of the power of youth voice, can become a broad movement and have a strong voice in the outcomes for elected officials across the country. I would also be remiss if I did not mention that several of the candidates before us this evening I know personally, worked with, and appreciate their desire to step out in front to claim a position of leadership for our community. So thank you all, candidates, for being here. The Boston Community Action Team, or BCAT, is a local subsidiary of the Opportunity Youth United national movement facilitated by Teen Empowerment and is made up of young adults who have experienced poverty and are dedicated to creating a society with opportunity and responsibility, love and respect, education and employment, and justice and equality for all. OYU's Boston Community Action Team is a group of youth leaders focused on educating opportunity youth and the community on civic engagement. They have made engaging and informing youth about the mayoral candidates' platform issues a priority for this year. The Opportunity Youth Collaborative. The Opportunity Youth Collaborative, or OYC, is a cross-section coalition convened by the Boston Opportunity Youth Agenda and the Boston PIC that includes major institutional partners like the Boston Public Schools and Bunker Hill Community College, as well as community programs that serve youth and adults. The OYC is focused on improving post-secondary and early career outcomes for youth and adults who are not served well by the traditional education and workforce preparation systems. The Youth Transition Task Force, or YTTF, has been convening since 2004 with the stated goal of reducing the high school dropout rate to zero. The YTTF focuses on increasing collaboration and sharing best practices for high school re-engagement, as well as impacting policies that disproportionately harm students of color and result in reduced student engagement, chronic absenteeism, and ultimately students dropping out. Tonight, we have three co-moderators for the event. Ariella Taylor and Carrie Mays are representing the BCAT team, and Megan Irons, the Boston Globe reporter, will be co-moderating with them. Wazira Ariella Taylor is a 17-year-old youth organizer and leader with a passion for civics and cognitive science. In addition to her role as assistant program coordinator for BCAT, she has worked with the Madison Park Development Corporation, Project Hip Hop, and the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative as a youth and board member. She is a rising senior at the John D. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science. In her free time, she reads young adult books, interns for the Cognitive and Brain Health Department at Northeastern, and participates in policy debate. She is the team captain for her O'Brien debate team and the Boston City champion for policy debate. She hopes to apply her skills as a community organizer and witness of social disparities in the user interface and experience field in computer software. We also have Carrie Mays. Carrie is currently a business management major at UMass Boston with a concentration in marketing. Recently, Carrie helped organize a major Black Lives Matter protest in Boston for George Floyd. In addition, she and a group of young people created a movement called Gang Gang Votes, where they registered over 320 people to vote in the city of Boston right before the presidential election. She was awarded the 2021 Mountaintop Award in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. for her work on youth civic engagement and was recognized by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and Governor Baker as an outstanding advocate. Carrie has spoken at national conferences and academic institutions as a motivational speaker and expert panelist in places such as Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Chicago, speaking on topics such as racism, youth civic engagement, and systematic inequality. She's been working alongside teen empowerment and the BCAT team for now 6 years. We also have Megan Irons, who is a reporter at the Boston Globe covering this year's mayor's race. She was a part of the team that produced the Globe's Valedictorians Project, which was a 2019 finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. The project helped launch the paper's Great Divide team, which covers race, class, and opportunities in our schools. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to turn tonight's event over to our co-moderator, Megan Irons. Thank you.
Abigail, thank you so much for that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Megan Irons, the reporter for the Boston Globe, and I'm delighted to be here today and to be joined this evening by my co-moderators, Ariella Taylor and Carrie Mays, two amazing young leaders and future stars in Boston. This evening's forum will focus on issues that affect young people, ages 16 to 24, known as opportunity youth. And these are young people who are disconnected from school, work, and the community resources they need to succeed. We're very pleased to host the 5 major candidates for Boston Mayor this evening: John Barrows, Andrea Campbell, Anissa Asabi George, Kim Janey, and Michelle Wu. Our goal is to hear from these candidates as they discuss their ideas about connecting young people to the education, training, employment, and pathways to careers. At the start of the pandemic, 5,000 young people were out of school and out of work in Boston. That number has likely increased since last year. These include students who've dropped out of high school graduates who haven't connected to the next step on their college or career pathway, and young adults who started college but stopped soon after. That number does not include young people who are out of school and marginally employed, or high school students who are chronically absent from school. Research has shown that serving opportunity youth is a critical racial equity issue. Before the pandemic, nearly 10% of Black young people were disconnected from school and work in Boston, according to a national survey. Comparatively, disconnection rates were 7% for Latinx people and 1.5% for white people ages 16 to 24. That data makes clear that if we do not improve the systems that serve these young people, they will be less likely to succeed in their life and their career goals. This coalition wants to know what the next mayor of Boston will prioritize when it comes to the needs of young people and what they will do to help them reach their goals. We're pleased that these candidates, all of them, are here to share their ideas with us this evening, and I want to thank you for being here. The questions that we're going to ask you over the course of this time will broadly focus on 3 categories. The first set of questions addresses trauma, homelessness, and other related issues. The second will address K through 12 school system in our high schools. And the third will address post-secondary education and career pathways. Each category aims to assess different sets of systems that have power to impact young people and their ability to assess college and good paying jobs. I'm going to turn it over now to Ariella, who will go over what the format of today's evening is going to be like. Ariella.
Yes, thank you, Megan, for that lovely introduction. So before we get into our conversation tonight, let's talk about the format. The candidates will respond to the questions in alphabetical order, beginning with John Barrows, who will start the first question. The second question will start with Councillor Campbell, and so on. Each of you will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to respond to each question. You will see a timer on the screen showing how long each candidate has left. At the end of the 1 minute and 15 seconds, we will mute your microphone and move on to the next candidate. We apologize in advance for any interruptions questions, but we want to be fair to the candidates by ensuring that they have the same amount of speaking time and respectful of the audience by finishing this forum promptly at 7 p.m. For the audience, we will have a Kahoot with some interesting Boston trivia questions, which we will play in the middle of the event. Passing it on to Carrie for the opening statement.
Thank you, Ariella. Now that we've gone through the event format, we will start the question and response portion. So for our first question, I hope you're listening. Imagine it's the end of your first year as the mayor of Boston, and it has been one heck of a year. You are standing before a large captive audience at Faneuil Hall, ready to deliver the State of the City address, ready to tell Bostonians of all of the work that you have done thus far. What will you highlight as your 3 major accomplishments that advance the education and career prospects of young people in this city who have been disconnected from school and work? And what would you highlight as your signature achievement to improve the system's ability to serve them well? First answering this question will be John Barrows, then Andrea Campbell, Anissa Asabi George, Kim Janey, and Michelle Wu.
First, let me just say, thank you to Carrie, Ariella, and Megan for facilitating this forum. I want to thank all of the partners who've gotten together, all the organizations who have gotten together to make sure that this is a topic, and all the young folks who continue to lead in our city and push for change. So, Carrie, to your question, great question. And at the end of my first year, I will first, acknowledge the fact that I'm proud to have been the first Black man to serve as mayor of Boston, and proud to be a role model for all younger Black and brown residents of the city of Boston who are looking to feel ownership of our city. And then I'll talk about the improvements that we've made in public education, investing $4 million in making sure that we're building state-of-the-art 21st century schools in all neighborhoods, investing in programs for ELL special needs that are needed, making sure that we have year-round jobs for all of the youth that want jobs in the city of Boston, and then making sure that we have 2 youth seats on the school committee, both who vote and both who get stipends. Youth voices are important, and we need to make sure they have leadership in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Barrows. Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Ariella. Of course, thank you, Megan, and the organizers and everyone for being on yet another Zoom. Really happy to be here. First, I will say I'm proud to be a candidate for mayor. I grew up in this city and I had incredible loss at the early part of my life, but this city gave me everything to be successful. And so my job has always been to make sure that every young person has the same opportunity I had growing up in the city of Boston. So sitting at sort of addressing the audience at that particular juncture, number one, we would have improved the educational outcomes of our students and ensure that every single family had access to an excellent education by also investing in Madison Park and establishing a VOTEC system that includes Madison Park and so many other institutions around it. The second, you can't learn if you're being racially profiled by our police. All these systems are connected. So I would absolutely make sure we reallocated at least 10% of that budget to the root causes of violence. Lastly, you can't learn if you're homeless and if you're struggling with housing instability. I would activate 100 city-owned lots to address not only youth homelessness, but ensure more home opportunities for our young residents as well. Thank you for having me.
Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank the organizers. Is the clock working?
We'll get it right for you, don't worry.
All right, thank you
Go
so
ahead.
much. I want to thank the organizers, certainly the moderators of this important conversation. And as the first woman mayor and the first Black mayor, I want to start by just being very grateful for the power of youth voice and youth advocacy. It has always been our young people who have led any social justice movement. Young people have been at the forefront. At the end of my first year, I want to get us through successfully this pandemic, making sure that our young people are protected, that we continue our focus on our K through 12 education, my strong advocacy in that space, elevating youth voice, making sure we're doing everything to eliminate the opportunity and achievement gap. Beyond K through 12, we've got to look at opportunities for career and college, building strong pipelines for our young people in industry, emerging industries, whether the green economy, whether life science, making sure that our young people can earn a living wage, and also focused on entrepreneurship, making sure that our young people can start businesses and can then be successful in all that they do throughout their life and raise and keep their families in the city of Boston.
Thank you, Mary Janie. We're going to go back to Anissa Sabi George. Sorry that we went out of order there.
Yes, sorry about that. My bad.
No worries. I'm grateful to be with all of you now and grateful to have the opportunity to talk about my work on the City Council and the work I will do as mayor of this city. First, very specifically in my first 100 days, not just in my first year as mayor, we will have a strategic plan in order around Madison Park Vocational Technical High School. And I hope at the end of that first year, we would have already started movement in a significant way implementing that strategic plan. I also think it's important that we've initiated the significant transformation that our Boston Public Schools need, making sure that every child is getting a high quality education and that we've begun to truly align curriculum, especially as it relates to early literacy for our youngest learners. We need to align that curriculum very specifically. And then we need to uplift youth and young adult voices in the work that we do every day and make sure that those voices are driving the agenda. Before I leave the Boston City Council and assume the role of mayor, I hope to have given that student member of the Boston School Committee their right to vote and access to that stipend. It's work I'm doing today and work I will continue to do as mayor of this city.
Councilor Wu.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mo and Carrie and Ariella, Megan, and all the organizers who have made sure that we could hear the issues, dreams, hopes, and get that accountability on how we will be following the lead of young people across our city. I am proud to be in my 8th year on the Boston City Council and to have represented the entire city for a transition period that we've seen from a time when there weren't very many women at all on the Boston City Council to now an incredible historic moment with the leadership of our mayor and this city council. We know what's possible in Boston when we all are at the table. And so in terms of the 3 main accomplishments that we'll celebrate, first, I hope that this would be a space, not in City Hall, but out in the community that will reflect the full diversity and representation of our city. One is really seeing our schools as a platform for opportunity, beautiful facilities, as well as the programming across all the resources we have to wrap around our young people. 2 is really connecting jobs for young people, opening up pipelines to all the major industries in Boston through Madison Park, through vocational opportunities, and directly through internships. And 3, we got to get people where they need to go. The tea should be free, and I'll fight to make sure that our young people continue to make progress in year-round access to that transportation system and their families.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. We'll pass it back to moderator Ariella.
For question 2, we will cover homelessness and housing insecurity. Despite a growing number of programs and initiatives that address youth homelessness, such as Bridge Over Troubled Waters, Y2Y, and Rising to the Challenge, just to name a few, we know many young people are still experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. Couch surfing, in particular, is a common form of housing instability that youth face. What are the main service gaps causing this problem, and how will your administration coordinate and expand housing access for youth, including increasing reintegration resources to make it easier for youth to survive homelessness and transition to more stable housing? Our response order will begin with Andrea Campbell, next Anissa Sabi George, Kim Janey, Michelle Wu, and then John Barros.
Thank you for this question and centering this particular issue, which often does not get talked about. And the couch surfing we know is real and has only gotten exacerbated by COVID-19. And so I just need to stress that no one in the city of Boston with the nearly $4 billion budget and some industries that will go into the trillions should be homeless in the city of Boston. And so as a district councilor representing largely Dorchester and Mattapan, I have done the work of helping those who are absolutely going through homelessness find safe and secure housing. I've actually pushed for the investment into Bridge Over Troubled Waters, helping them get resources and other organizations as well. What else do we need to do? We need to stop working in a siloed way. Number one, intentionality and investment. We absolutely need to be creating more housing and permanent housing. We can do that with the vacant lots I just mentioned. I'm actually activating city-owned vacant lots right now. Drive up Blue Hill Ave, you will see the signs. That is because of the work out of my district. The second is workforce development in jobs and high wages, critically important. They go hand in hand. More investment there, absolutely important. And then the last piece is making sure that our young people, whether it's substance use disorder or something else that is driving homelessness, that we get at the root causes as well, and mental health. All, of course, need greater investments.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Ms. George?
This question is something that I feel overwhelmingly passionate about. We did not, as a city, talk about family homelessness until I became a counselor at large in 2016. I have led the conversations and the work to end family homelessness and homelessness for our students in the Boston Public Schools, especially since joining the council. We have 5,000 students experiencing homelessness in a variety of settings. And through my work on the council, through my fierce leadership on the council, we've been able to make tremendous gains, both in direct investment in our opportunity youth, especially those experiencing homelessness, funds going directly to schools, making sure that those that are charged with the work of protecting and serving and supporting our kids and their families are in place, whether it's a full-time nurse in every school building, I did that. Whether it's a full-time social and emotional specialist in every school, I did that. Whether it's the dollars that follow our kids in every school, where every school has students experiencing homelessness, I did that. I also want to say that my team at City Hall was part of the family-led stability pilot that brought resources for families directly to our school programs, and so much more. I hope to have an opportunity to discuss it further.
Thank you, Councilor George. Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much. As someone who has experienced housing insecurity firsthand, actually stayed in a homeless shelter, I bring that lived experience and that lens to this work with a fierce sense of urgency. And I understand that this is not about one person doing anything. This is about all of us working together, which is why I'm breaking down silos that currently exist to make sure that we are addressing this work together, creating a children and youth cabinet with our superintendent of schools, with our chief of housing to tackle these issues head on. We know that this is exacerbated because of COVID. We know that young people who are transgender experience homelessness even more. And so we have to make sure that we are bringing different folks to the table to tackle these challenges together. I started off my very first week making sure we were investing in housing with $50 million and a rental relief fund, making sure that we could help families on the ground, 3,400 households to date. We are going to continue to do this work, break down the silos, work together to address youth homelessness and make sure everyone who wants to call Boston home can do so.
Thank you, Mayor Janey. And next we'll move to Councilor Wu.
We have all been reminded through the pandemic that housing is health, housing is your livelihood, housing is a foundation to everything else that we need, and is the #1 most urgent issue across our neighborhoods. One of the very first things I did when I joined the council years ago was to go and visit every single emergency shelter in the city. It was because I had had so many conversations with residents experiencing homelessness on the campaign trail that I had promised I would go and see and be there and hear directly from those living the impacts. And every shelter told me, we are not equipped, we're not ready, preparing for young people who are increasingly finding themselves unhoused. And especially, a huge proportion of those young people identifying as members of the LGBTQ community. And so the organizations that have stepped up to fill in those gaps, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, Y2Y, so many of the ones that were mentioned earlier, know and are the contacts to the young people we need to reach. And so what are the service gaps? We need supports for mental health, trauma response, and safety. We need to ensure that there's food security all around. And we can reintegrate young people by making sure that we are using schools as a platform and one touch point for all of that.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. And we will next move to moderator Carrie Mays. I'm sorry, John Barrows.
Thank you, Mo. Appreciate it. This is such an important issue, and it's right. I think it was Ariella who said it, but we often talk about homelessness, but we need to make it in stable housing, youth that are instably housed, because too many young people are couch surfing, are not sure exactly where they're going. Although they might be able to go to a home, it's not consistently the same home. Too many of our families have to move 1, 2, 3, 4 times a year, and nobody can stay in school and do well with all that movement. I want to shout out Bridge, Y2Y, Break Time for all of the work that you guys are doing there, out there with our youth. But then I also want to say we need to work with the state on this issue. I was schooled most recently by young people that youth who are aging out of the foster system are coming out with no supports. They're being left out on their own, and we either need to make sure that we're working with the state so we have better planning, better handoff, some better coordination to make sure that our young people have the supports that they need, even at the age of 18. I understand they become adults, but as a city, we've got to have a coordinated approach on this. I will work with young people who are leading this effort on the ground as mayor to make sure that this city is supportive of all of our young people as they're transitioning to housing.
Thank you, Mr. Barrows. Next, we'll go to moderator Carrie Mays.
Our next question will be regarding violence that impacts youth. As we've unfortunately seen, there has been an uptick in gun violence during the pandemic. Boston seeing a 29% increase in shootings and a 34% increase in fatal shootings in 2020 as compared to 2019 data. Violence in the community has a profound impact on young people, both directly and through their peer networks, causing long-term harm to mental health through the trauma of this repeated exposure. How will your administration coordinate and expand programs or grassroots organizing in this space to be proactive instead of just reactive to violence? How will you create support systems for youth impacted by violence? In addition, what will your administration do to address how systems of racial inequity and inequality in Boston contribute to violence in the city? First person answering this question will be Anissa Asabi George, Kim Janey, Michelle Wu, John Barrows, and then Andrea Campbell.
Councilor George.
Thank you for this question. Boston has an opportunity to implement reforms in policing and demonstrate the benefit of accountability and transparency, and truly lead and fulfill the promise of community policing. We can be both a safe and just city. These are not mutually exclusive concepts. Too many times we have criminalized mental health, substance use disorder, and homelessness. That needs to stop, and that's work I've led on the Boston City Council. I've fought to integrate mental health responses into our public safety response. I've expanded and advocated for an increase in our best clinicians who are paired with police officers, but also working to be proactive in their response to crises across our city and intervene. We also know that gun violence is an epidemic that strikes our streets every single day. It's certainly a racial justice issue, a public health issue, and a public safety issue. It's a result of systemic racism, cycles of poverty, bearing and really impacting our neighborhoods every single day. It's an outcome of a lack of opportunity. And we as a city, I as mayor, have a responsibility and an opportunity to tackle these barriers head on, to break these cycles of poverty and trauma, and to keep our residents safe.
Thank you, Councilor George. I'm going to move to Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for that question. You know, I live on a street that has a reputation for gang activity and gun violence, and I've seen more than my fair share, as have the young people who live here. This issue is very personal to me, and I am proud that The numbers that we have seen in 2021, we are seeing a decrease as compared to 2020. I don't want to see any acts of violence. Let's be clear. Any act of violence is one too many. And we know that this is about unaddressed trauma. We know that this is about lack of opportunity. We know that this is about an education system that doesn't always work for our young people. It is why I was proud to launch a pilot program where we are investing almost $2 million for alternative responses, making sure that mental health professionals are taking the lead in a co-response, an alternative response, and with a community response. We have to address the root causes of these issues if we want to see safe communities where there is healing, justice, and peace.
Thank you, Mayor Janey. We're going to move next to Councilor Wu.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie, for not just the question, but how you framed it and really emphasizing that the impacts of trauma ripple out from each incident of violence in the community so that, I mean, we all know how widespread of an experience it is for our young people in the Boston Public Schools to have known someone to have been affected by violence on our streets. And we need to act with urgency and intersectionality to not just ensure that we are targeting with the public safety resources, but really to recognize this as an issue of community stability, of opportunity for our young people, and moving us in a direction where we are putting the resources, not in City Hall, but out in the community. We have to create those safe spaces for community members to celebrate, to gather, to be together, especially coming out of the pandemic when people have been so isolated and are living with the stress, the trauma, the grief, the experience of having been through this pandemic. The mental health epidemic that is following is where we will continue to react, need to be proactive about crisis. And most of all, we know in Boston what works, which is bringing communities together, following the lead of those already doing the work on the ground.
Thank you, and let's move next to John Barrows.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you, Carrie, for that question. It is super important that we recognize that safety starts with building community, providing opportunities, and addressing the root causes of systemic marginalization, systemic racism, those things that keep us from connecting, from being our best. And so whether we're talking about the homelessness that we just addressed, trauma, cycles of violence, we need to address everyone, particularly when there is violence on our streets, as if they're victim, both those who perpetrated it and those who were impacted by the violence. Two months ago, a young brother was shot 2 doors down from my house, and shot, and the trauma that exists in the neighborhood after that doesn't often get dealt with in the way it needs to get dealt with. A grandmother was shot 2 minutes away from my house. And so we've got to make sure that we take all of these acts of violence very seriously and provide resources to all our families, and then provide opportunity for people to get out of those circumstances by making sure that we have counseling, and then think about what's happening in the house that we can address. This is about building community, strengthening our families, and providing opportunities.
Thank you, John Barrows. And next to Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Mo and Carrie. Thank you for the question and the framing. And I think what you got at is that all of these systems, whether it's Boston Public Schools and school police, the policing model we have in the city of Boston, and of course our incarceration and criminal legal system, all of them are connected. We often don't talk about them as being a pipeline that is connected with significant racial disparities. I talk about my twin brother, Andre, not only because I love him and I miss him, he died while in the custody of a state prison. He was over-disciplined within Boston Public Schools. None of that happened to me, and my life is different because of that. And so when I was putting together my public safety plan, I engaged Rachel Rollins, Sheriff Tompkins, those in the DOC, young people, community-based organizers, to come up with the most comprehensive plan out of any candidate in this race, and to build upon the work I was already doing. And saying that, one, we need to transform our response to police. I don't want to just reduce violence in the city of Boston. I want to eradicate it. That is possible. And I want to, of course, make sure that we actually take 10% at least from our police budget and redirect it to the root causes of violence, moving people out of poverty, trauma, improving, of course, our Boston Public Schools, mental health, substance use disorder, and so much more. I'm the only candidate.
Thank you,
with such a
Campbell.
plan.
Thank you. We're gonna have
Thank
to
you,
move
Mo.
on. We're going to move to our moderator, Ariella Taylor, to move us forward.
Question 4 will cover the topic of mental health. Lack of resources and the stigma around mental health care barriers for youth to address creates barriers for youth to address mental health challenges in Boston. There are not nearly enough counselors in schools or the community, particularly counselors of color, to make them readily accessible to the teens and young adults who need them. In fact, according to the American School Counselor Association, only 2 countries in the state meet the recommended student to counselor ratio, and Massachusetts is not one of them. What 3 things will your administration do to improve equitable access to mental health care, both in school and in the community, and to remove the stigma around seeking mental health services? The response order will begin with Kim Janey, next Michelle Wu, John Barros, Andrea Campbell, ending with Anissa Asabi George.
Thank you so much, Ariella. This is such an important topic, and certainly, like all of us, I'm sure, we have a personal experience here dealing with mental health challenges. I know in my own family, this is a real issue. And so it is very important, one, that we remove the stigma, that we understand that all of us need to seek out help, that seeking help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. When it comes to what we can do from a systemic standpoint, it is important that we are engaging our young people and that we are engaging mental health professionals of color. I specifically, whether that be in our hospitals, whether that be people who work with young people in our schools, we need to do much more to recruit and retain folks who do this work. The last thing that I will say is the importance of how we respond to crisis in our city. With the mental health pilot that I just launched a couple of weeks ago, that looks at a co-response, an alternative response, and a community response, because we can't continue to criminalize mental health. We've got to put the experts on the ground to deal with people who are facing a crisis, and so that they can get the help that they so desperately need.
Thank you, Mayor Janey. Councilor Wu.
Thank you. I'm glad that this is part of the conversation too. It's an issue that's so personal to me and my family, and really the reason why I am in government at all is my mom was diagnosed with late onset schizophrenia when I was in my early 20s. And it was just over a couple of weeks that she went from being just the force in our family, holding everyone together, to not being able to really care for herself for a very intense period of time, much less my younger siblings. And so I've been with her in the emergency room overnight, waiting and begging for a bed to open up. I've been with her when the police have been called and you're just there frozen in terror, hoping things don't go wrong in just a split second. We need to make sure that not only are the services there, but that residents see themselves reflected in seeking treatment and break down that stigma. So 3 things that I'll do. 1, the Boston Public Health Commission should be bulked up so much. We hardly are investing in the city side resources available to be able to meet the need. 2 is really using our schools as a platform, ensuring that there are not just partnerships available with local providers, but that is built into how we think about everything within our schools. And then last of all, integrating a conversation across all of our public health institutions in Boston.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Next, John Barros.
Yeah, thank you, Mo. And this is such an important question. 4 weeks ago, I assembled a group of Black men to talk about, Black men voices and issues in the community. And, we talked about public health, and the central part of the conversation became mental health. It became how we take care of ourselves. And too often we feel like there's too much, we've got to take care of our own. It's not okay to be vulnerable and ask for help or go seek help. And we've got to change that stigma. We've got to change that stereotype. So it starts with all of us being models and role models to each other, and just be honest with the fact that we need help, and then go try to find it. And then in government, we need to make sure that help is available in our schools. It is ridiculous that in Boston public schools, the ratio is probably still 1 to like 300 or 400 students have a guidance counselor, that we don't have enough social emotional support, even for folks who have IEPs asking for it. As mayor, I'll address this, and I'll make this the #1 issue for our city. Mental health of our people is the first thing we need to take care of.
Thank you, Mr. Barrows. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you for this question. When I was 8 months old, my biological mom died in a car accident going to visit my father, who was incarcerated at the time. And my father was incarcerated for the first 8 years of my life. So my brothers and I actually lived in the foster care system for a period of time, where we bounced around with our grandmother. My father gets out of prison when we're 8. He suddenly passes away when we're 19 years old. I was a sophomore at Princeton at the time. I talked to my dad one morning. He died that same evening. Fast forward, my twin brother will die in a state prison setting. I've had a lot of loss and trauma. But what I always stress to young people is that there is power in our stories. And it connects to this very issue around trauma. We need to encourage our people to share their stories with no shame and no stigma attached, because that's #1. Because that's about personal healing, and leaders need to do that. And I do that all the time because I have people who encourage me to do that. And what I've learned is when you're vulnerable, it's powerful. The second piece that is critically important, the city of Boston needs to invest more money, period. Not in the policing model, but in organizations on the ground that are providing services, and of course, closing those guidance counselor gaps. And lastly, investing in providers of color, critically important. We can do all of that.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Next, Councilor Sabi George.
I've said it time and time again, the next crisis we'll face as a city is a mental health crisis. And if you didn't know it yet, we're already here. I want to thank you for asking this question, because one way to break the stigma around mental health is to talk about it openly and honestly. It is okay to not be okay, but we need to make sure that each one of us can access the appropriate supports. We must do more to prioritize mental health in our schools for both students and educators. We also need to prioritize mental health in our communities, including culturally responsive and competent services, and making sure that those services are done in the languages our communities, our residents, our neighbors, and our students speak. That's why I've advocated for a full-time licensed mental health professional in every school, including a full-time psychologist, a full-time school counselor, and a full-time social worker. I will continue to work today, as I have over these last almost 6 years, to make sure that that is so. And as mayor, I will continue with that same commitment. This is especially important since over the past 1.5 years, our students and our educators have felt the devastating impacts of COVID, the isolation, the anxiety, and the trauma it has caused. We've got work to do, and we have to do it together.
Thank you, Councilor George. We are going to move forward to moderator Megan Irons.
Megan, you're on mute.
I do that all the time. Ariella and Carrie, I just want to thank you for your amazing moderating, and the candidates for your riveting answers. And I'll now turn it back over to the questioning, and Carrie, your turn.
Thank you, Megan. That was fun. I've been a Bostonian all my life, and I didn't even know some of those answers. So you learn something new every day. Hey. So next we'll be going into our question and portion, which is going to be around school environment and discipline practices. Curriculum, discipline, and school policies play a role in shaping school environments. Punitive discipline cultures contribute to students feeling disengaged and pushed out the classroom, which affects attendance and prevents learning, especially for students of color. Students of color are more than twice as likely to be suspended from school than their white peers. In Massachusetts, Black girls are nearly 4 times more likely to face school discipline than white girls. Currently, the district is struggling to engage students in conversation around shifting school culture, with half of the Boston Student Advisory Council leaders resigning in this struggle last school year. Do you support a restorative justice policy to build a positive school culture to deal with discipline? What plan does your administration have to work with students to move from punitive discipline policies to transformative justice policies, such as restorative justice, critical race theory, open circles, or others? First answering this question will be Michelle Wu, then John Barrows, Andrea Campbell, Anissa Asabi George, and Kim Janey.
Thank you so much for this question. Okay, there's a timer. In fact, last summer, my office worked to make sure we were going through the Boston specific data as well and put together a report on push out within BPS and how it compares to national trends. We know that this is in our neighborhoods, in our schools, an issue that's urgent. And shout out to the reporting that has continued to affirm that and emphasize how much we need to do as well. We need to make sure that those impacted are leading the conversation, and that it is not just about how we are addressing accountability or discipline after the fact, but that we are creating spaces for these conversations. We have the appropriate facilities for restorative justice circles, the rooms that groups can gather in and for those conversations to happen, that we have the training across the board and professional development for all school community members to be able to implement this, and that we know that this can only be implemented and match the need in our schools when our young people are leading the charge. So I fully commit to ensuring that BSAC, or an even more revitalized version, is setting these policies and working closely with the district on it.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. John Barrows.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you, Carrie, for that question. It is critical that we bring in restorative practices to our schools. Restorative practice is about youth leadership. Restorative practice is about making sure that young people are leading the processes that include effective statements, building our community building circles and making sure that those are safe spaces, creating small impromptu conferencing, right? So that we can actually talk about these things, understand what's going on, and settle things, and then setting up classroom agreements and norms. These are things that have been great practices in youth leadership anyways. If you've done youth facilitation, you know that you set culture by agreeing on what we're going to do and not do, by agreeing how we're going to engage. And schools need to do that. Now we need to also have, full-time people that are going to be there to help create these norms, these settings, so that young people can have the conversations to create the norms. So as mayor, I'll make sure that we have it in our budget, that it's no longer a pilot in BPS, and all schools have full-time staff to work with our students to set the conditions, the norms, and the rules, and the building, the community circles that we need for restorative justice practices.
Thank you, Mr. Barrows. Next, Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Mo. So this is how I started my legal career. I was actually working for a local nonprofit in Roxbury, representing students for free in school discipline cases, expulsion cases, suspension cases, special needs cases, you name it. So during that work, I knew this data, and sadly, much of it has gotten worse, not better, over the years, and have been fighting for a long time on dismantling this cradle to prison pipeline, because that's what it creates, these type of policies and practices, and fought along with so many other advocates, including our acting mayor, on changing legislation at the state level to exclude these types of practices. So as mayor, one, I would remove school police from our buildings. There's not a role that they play. It literally does perpetuate this cycle of criminality. The second is investment in social emotional curriculum. Some schools have it, some do not. Some schools have guidance counselors, some do not. So greater investments on those. And then of course, a whole array of restorative practices, critical race theory. I went to UCLA Law School. That's almost where this theory was founded. Critically important that it's be incorporated, circles, all of that, but it needs to be an array of options. All of that we can do in the city of Boston.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Next, Councilor Anissa Asabi George.
I was a 13-year classroom teacher in Boston. And before that, many years before that, I was a member of the Boston Student Advisory Council. I was a BSAC kid. And during that time, I served as a student member to the citywide effort to reevaluate our student code of discipline. Today, I'm a Boston City Councilor at large and chair of the Council's Committee on Education. Through this work, I've pushed for the district to reform our school policies that are driving the school to prison pipeline, especially for our students of color, especially for our Black and brown boys who are disproportionately placed in sub-separate special education classrooms. And through that, we find the school to prison pipeline. It directly goes through those sub-separate classrooms. Through my advocacy to improve our special education services in our district, I continue to work to limit that number. This work is certainly by no means done. We always need to be talking about and taking into account the biases, the inequities, and the discriminatory policies and practices that are in place in our school district and across our country. We need to encourage anti-racist efforts and work to include our ethnic studies curriculum, which I have worked towards as a member of the City Council.
Thank you, Councilor. Next, we'll go to Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And I want to thank all of the organizers again. I am a little over time. I mentioned that I did have to leave for a prior commitment when I first joined, but I really wanted to answer this question. This is something that I have spent much of my career working toward, making sure that our children, our students felt safe in classroom, making sure that we had a teacher diversity, that we were doing more with our curriculum. I'm very proud of the work that the organization that I gave 17 years of my life to, Mass Advocates for Children, was a leader in getting Chapter 222 passed. And that went into effect in 2014. I did that work, as Councilor Campbell said, along with a number of advocates, and so important, including our young people. And we have much more work to do because we know in practice, our young people continue to be targeted, over-disciplined, particularly not just boys of color, but girls. The gap is actually larger when you look at girls. And this starts very early. It starts in daycare. It starts in early ed. We've got to do more. I'm going to work in partnership with all of you to make sure we're hitting the mark. Again, I thank you.
Mayor Janey.
I have to leave. Thank you so much for a wonderful evening and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Janey. We are going to go next to our moderator, Megan Irons.
Thank you, Mo, and thanks for participating, Mayor Janey. Our next question has to deal with alternative education and high school re-engagement. Students who drop out of high school are less likely to get good jobs and more likely to fall into the school to prison pipeline. In fact, a young person who has dropped out of high school can expect to earn 20% less than a high school graduate on average, and 31% less than someone with an associate's degree. Alternative education pathways are key lifelines for students who have been pushed out or become disengaged from the traditional education system. Boston actually takes the positive step of re-engaging these students into alternative education programs, but these programs are dismissed as less valid than traditional high schools and are often underfunded. How would you prioritize funding for alternative education programs? How would you increase opportunities around college, career, and workforce connections for alternative education students? And please respond in this order: John Barrows, then Andrea Campbell, then Anissa Asabi-George, and then Michelle Wu. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. It is critical that we continue to re-engage our students. And I want to applaud the work of the Boston Re-Engagement Center, the work that is done by PIC, the work that is done by others to make sure, in fact, that we have safe space to re-engage students that are older, that might have dropped out for other reasons. We need to make sure that we can do it and then help our students not just because they've dropped out, but because in fact they've moved on as well. And so as students move on from the re-engagement center, we need to make sure that we're helping them to the next step. So Boston needs to have a 4-year program of supporting our students either after they've graduated or after they've re-engaged and have their Boston high school degree into the next level. I was proud to work with the mayor to make sure, in fact, that we made it more accessible and affordable for people to move on. So we created the city's tuition-free college program to make sure that people can get up to 3 years of colleges for free. We have to do more to support our students to re-engage, graduate, and then to succeed post high school.
Thank you, Mr. Barrows. Councilor Campbell.
It was prompting me at the same time I was unmuting myself. Thank you for this question in this particular framing, because I think in every forum that we attend, we often just talk about the exam schools, for example, not talking about the other failures within our system. And that includes not only Madison Park not having the investments it needs, but the graduation rates, the abysmal graduation rates for our non-exam high schools. Nearly 6 out of 10 students will not graduate. And that's no fault of theirs. That's because they're not getting the resources and the partnerships and the jobs and the access to internships, et cetera, that they need to be successful. And so one, it truly is creating not only a Madison Park, but a VOTEC system where Madison Park is the center of that. And we know that when folks leave a robust and excellent VOTEC system, they can go into jobs right away, not incur any student waiting for our young people. The second piece that is critically important is investments in the re-engagement center and other efforts that are happening that are under-resourced in the city of Boston. We have nearly a $1.2 billion budget, $400 million coming from the feds. We can absolutely make greater investment. And then the last is those aging out, DCF, those who also need services too need greater investment.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Next is Councilor Anissa Savi-George.
Thank you for this question. And we as a city have continued to fail too many of our kids across our entire district. And I think most harmed by the failures of our system are kids who are in alternate ed programs, in specialized programs, and in some of these sub-separate settings. We need to expand and increase investments in the city's workforce development programs. We have to prioritize Madison Park Vocational Technical High School and vocational education programs in the Boston Public Schools. This includes educational opportunities for our young people, for adults, and to specifically increase the school to career pipeline for individuals living, studying, and working in our city. Madison Park should be the gem of our Boston public school system. The potential is there. We just need to put the work into it. One of my top priorities will be establishing a direct pipeline from Madison Park to workforce opportunities in the city, including green jobs, the life sciences, certainly the construction trades, health careers, and financial services. If the job exists in the city of Boston, our kids should have access to it first. And in my first 100 days, I've mentioned that 100-day plan that will be rolled out.
Thank you. Next is Councilor Wu.
Thank you. My leadership style is I don't like to just read the reports and look at the numbers. There's no substitute for actually being out there and hearing directly from folks on the ground and seeing what's happening, where the gaps are, where the resources need to be plugged in. And so a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, I went and visited every single Boston Public High School, and it was almost 30 visits, a couple hours at each school, and we made sure to include and prioritize our alternative education schools as well. Day and Evening Academy, the Diploma Plus program at Charlestown High, and a couple things were sticking out from those visits and really seeing the themes, which was that one, we have to move away from a deficit-based way of talking about alternative ed and credit recovery programs and move to recognizing the strength, the resiliency, the incredible talent that is going into making sure our students are balancing everything that's happening in their lives. And so we can't talk about how to fund these programs properly unless we're looking at that whole universe of what our young people need. It's not just how to get to school, but childcare, housing, and then connecting, as so many have talked about, to jobs.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. And we are going to move to the next question. The moderator is Ariella Taylor.
Question 4 will cover college access and success. Boston is fortunate to have a number of prominent institutions of higher education within its borders, and majority of Boston public school graduates do enroll in college. What is less well known is that only 54% of those who enroll finish college within 6 years. Black and Latino students are even less likely to finish college, with 6-year completion rates of 36.1% and 33.6% respectively. Many young people who want to go to college see finances as a barrier. As of July 2021, 43.2 million students in America had borrowed for college with an average debt of $39,351. Community colleges are less expensive, serve a diverse population of students, and are easier to access than many four-year schools. But we know that in Massachusetts, community colleges are notoriously under-resourced, and many young people feel there's a stigma associated with community college. What 2 major initiatives would you implement to make community college and four-year college more accessible and affordable, and to increase college completion rates for BPS students? Our response order will start with Andrea Campbell, next Anissa Sabi-George, Michelle Wu, finishing with John Barros.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you for this question. A few different things. One, I appreciate you naming the stigma piece, because you often hear that from young people. And I often remind them, the private institutions, there is no way they are going to be able to develop the workforce and the employees that we need when you think about the jobs that are online now and the jobs to come. All of these systems, including our community colleges, our public, our state system, all of these systems are going to have to work together. And the community colleges, like you said, have been under-resourced. There is a way, of course, to make sure that, one, our Boston Public School students who are going to some of these community colleges, that they go for free. I want to give credit where credit's due. The previous mayor, obviously Marty Walsh, started some of this and made some of these investments. We can absolutely expand upon that. The second piece that is critically important, it goes back to Madison Park, the VOTEC system that I talked about. Not everyone wants to go to college. Not everyone needs to go to college for the dreams that they have for themselves. So we also need to make sure there's no stigma attached there, and that we're creating these systems within Boston Public Schools for students to access so that they can go out from BPS straight to their careers, but also the partnerships with local colleges to get certifications while they're still in BPS. We can do that as well.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Next, we'll go to Councilor Anissa Sabi-George. Councilor George.
So I think very specifically about this question and the 2 priorities that we have. It certainly has to include continuing to grow and expand the City of Boston's free community college and workforce training programs effort. And when we do that, we increase access. Through that, we increase access to post-secondary education options for all of Boston's students. And I think certainly the priority has to be our Boston Public Schools kids, but we have to look for options for kids that are Boston kids and attending other school districts. Oftentimes those students get left out of these equations and this conversation. We also need to improve connections and partnerships with local universities and those community colleges for our kids, including a robust college mentorship program for every high school freshman. We have so many college kids in this city today, or maybe not today, but certainly just after Labor Day. There is no reason why each one of those students shouldn't be partnered with one of our city's kids to help guide them through the process of exploring and entertaining the idea of attending college. And also related to this is my commitment in my first 100 days to reconvene the pilot task force. These partners need to be at the table and work alongside us as a city.
Thank you, Councilor George. Next, Councilor Wu.
Thanks for this question. Student debt and how we can be a city that is seen around the world as the mecca of higher ed, and yet see such big gaps between our Boston Public School young people is something that we can fix and that we will fix. I want to make sure that as we are, as mentioned before, convening partnerships between Boston Public Schools and our state universities, our community colleges, we can expand and push on these programs so that it is seen as one seamless way and a guaranteed option for any of our young people. The second is to ensure that, as Councilor Sabi George was saying, that all universities are doing their part. We should have scholarship programs. We should be pushing the universities that are located right here in Boston, using our resources and benefiting from the public safety and city infrastructure that they're giving back as well in ways that are tangible and concrete. And then I want to make sure that we are providing the supports to help every young person as they're thinking about this transition from what to do after BPS, make the best informed decisions with all the information and supports and financial literacy coaching and other information that they need. There are many programs out there that are predatory, and we need to be able to help provide the guidance, the support to help connect people.
Thank you. John Barrow's next.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you for the question. It is critical, in fact, that we build on some of the successful programs that we already have going. The tuition-free community college program is one. When you couple it with Boston Bridge, I think the comment in the chat was right. We need to expand the criteria for students who can take care of the community-free, tuition-free college, community college program, so we can have more people involved in it. And then the citizenship pathway is something that is so important. Too many of my friends who graduated from high school couldn't go on to college because of that, and that's something that we've got to work on. We also need to make sure that we're supporting things like Success Boston, and it has had, tremendous success in increasing college attendance and making sure that BPS students have the support they need to graduate. There's the city's scholarship program, the redesign of the city scholarship program, which has increased support for college students from Boston, and then launched of the Grad Last Mile Fund, I think is what it's called. It's a scholarship program designed to help students facing financial hardship, because we know financial hardship is really key for a lot of people dropping out of school. And then City Academy, that helps students to train in professions around emergency services, has been key as well.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to move to our last question, moderator Carrie Mays.
Thank you, Mo. And I just want to shout out the chat because our participants are very engaged, and I appreciate it because this event is called Re-Engaged. So thank you for everyone commenting in the chat, and as well as the panelists and the candidates for your answers, because it's aligning with our last question, which is around non-college pathways and occupational training. There's a huge societal belief that all students want to go to college after high school, but this is not always true. 30% of young people who graduate from the BPS do not attend college, and nearly half of those who start college do not finish. In addition to stronger college pathways, Boston needs both high-quality job training programs that can accelerate high school graduates into good-paying positions on the job market, and increased investment in high school career paths that include paid internships to prepare young people to pursue a career. How will your administration expand quality career exploration, job training, and career connections across settings in Boston for youth and young adults? First answering this question will be Anissa Asabi George, then Michelle Wu, John Barrows, and Andrea Campbell.
This is a great question. As a graduate of Boston Tech, now the O'Briens, I had firsthand experience with the benefits of technical training. And I know that a vocational education is an essential foundation for a well-rounded and rigorous academic experience. Investing in vocational and technical education will ensure that our city's kids are prepared to take advantage of our ever-expanding labor market. We need to ensure that our workforce is prepared to take advantage of future job opportunities, and that workforce is made up of our kids, whether it's opportunities in clean energy, life sciences, financial services, the healthcare industry, construction trades, culinary arts, the entire spectrum. I have long been a strong advocate for expanding technical and vocational education at Madison Park, and will continue to lead on that as mayor of this city. I'm also a former Boston PIC career specialist. I know we must build up Boston's career pipelines and continue summer youth employment and expand them to year-long opportunities for our city's kids. We need to also continue to expand tuition-free college tuition, as we discussed in that last question, and increase access to opportunities for our kids across the
Thank you,
board.
Councilor George. Councilor Wu, it's your turn next.
So I think what I want to make sure we're recognizing is that not only should we be breaking the stigma when it comes to vocational education and really plugging all of our schools into voc ed, of course, with Madison Park being invested in as the center of that, but the jobs that are in our economy are changing very quickly, especially after the pandemic. If you ask most of the big companies in Boston, the roles that they used to hire for right here in Boston are now much more about tech and coding. And we're going to have so many jobs that we need to take on as we tackle the climate crisis, right? Installing all the infrastructure and retrofitting our buildings. And that's why I've proposed programs already to make sure that city government is providing those workforce development and training programs for our young people, for those returning from incarceration, for those who are changing jobs and looking to switch fields. We have federal funding coming in a one-time, once in a generation way. We need to make sure that this is closing those gaps. And then the last thing I'll say is that, when it comes to paid internships, the city has to lead. We've been shrinking the criteria lately. We need to get back to guaranteeing every young person throughout the year, not just during the summer.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Next, the question goes to John Barrows.
Thank you, Mo. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
thank you. So it's critical when we look at the Boston jobs market. Too many of our employers are asking for degrees where they don't need them. In fact, we did a study called the Untapped Report in Boston, and degree inflation is a big problem in our job market. Everybody doesn't need to have a college degree to get a good job so they can take care of their families. As mayor, I will continue to lead in this area and ask our employers to stop doing that. It's something I did as chief of economic development. And then I worked to create accelerators so that those who don't want to go to school can move right into building their own company. An accelerator on robotics, an accelerator in digital health. There is no reason why those accelerators can't be attached to our schools, attached to all of our schools, to make sure that our students are thinking about building their own companies and moving on their innovations immediately. Working in the life science sector to make sure that our students are thinking about what they can be doing to help support the largest life science, the largest sector in our economy. And then it starts with our schools, but Madison Park is critical. Read my plan online because I've run out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Barrows. Thank you for respecting the clock there. And last, Councilor Campbell.
I love this question, and I have to just pick up on what John said, Barrows, because it really does connect. I dream of a Boston public school system where we have pathways into the dreams, not just the jobs, but the dreams of our young people, because we know that's going to change over time, where you can literally look at the portfolio within Boston public schools and say, I want to be a veterinarian, I want to be a beautician, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to start and create a new product, I want to go into robotics, I want to be an artist, I want to go into the creative economy, I want to go into tech, vo-tech, whatever it is, that you can see how to navigate that pathway through Boston Public Schools, that you get the skill development that you need, you get the internship that is paid by a local employer or company in the city of Boston, because we have all of them here, that you get opportunities to get college credits and certifications while you're within Boston Public Schools. And not just from the community colleges or the state system, but from the private colleges too. And that we push upon everyone in our ecosystem, the healthcare institutions, the medical institutions, the research institutions, everyone to play a role in creating all of these wraparound services so that we're graduating students who go directly into their dreams.
Thank you. We'll close today with comments from our moderator, Megan Irons.
Thank you, Andrea, for your passion in your answer. And that concludes our line of questioning for today. I want to thank the candidates for taking time out of their busy schedules to join this forum this evening and talk about their plans to support Opportunity Youth in Boston. I want to thank my co-moderators for their amazing questions and for the team that put together this forum that is so important as we have conversations around the city pertaining to our young people. I'd also like to thank the audience for attending and participating and for showing your support for these critical issues. Thank you again and have a great rest of the evening. Good evening.